Hello and welcome to my Action Research virtual poster presentation for EDBE 8Y43. So for this Action Research study, I spent a lot of time considering the problem that I wanted to address, and I decided to focus on one that I have noticed to be an issue in virtually every class I have either been a student in or that I have had the privilege of teaching myself. And this has been group work. I've noticed a lot of students have had trouble working together in groups and collaborating well. And as I started looking into this, I came across an interesting quote. This was a quote by the Director of Formative Assessment and Feedback for Pearson, and she said that collaboration is just like any other skill. It must be taught. I had not thought of it this way, and this helped inform some of my thoughts about this topic and about the research that I would then do. So when I came up with my research problem, as I mentioned, I found that a lot of students struggled to finish their group work on time. This was often due to disagreements about how it would be done, arguments about who was right, and how the finished product should look, as well as just distractions as well, such as friendships. And collaboration is a really, really important 21st century skill, so I really wanted to help build this skill in my students. The skill consists of a lot of really important elements as well, such as active listening and conflict resolution. So very, very important parts, and all things which I really, really wanted to address where I had to start this action research study. So these informed some of my initial thoughts as I then devised my research question. My research question was, what effect does the explicit teaching of active listening and collaboration skills, particularly those centering around conflict resolution, have on the productiveness of students in group work? So put simply, are students more productive in groups if they're taught how to collaborate beforehand? This is something I'd not really considered too much before, which is why I really enjoyed the chance to look into this topic and probe this question a little bit more deeply. So from here, I naturally had to define some of the most important and relevant terms surrounding this question. So as was mentioned before, active listening is one of those. So here it's defined as a technique used to resolve conflicts that focuses on fully concentrating on what the speaker is saying. A really good way to consider this is listening to understand rather than simply to respond. And this is a problem I know I have, which is why I know it's also something that a lot of students struggle with. So something very important to be taught. Collaboration, as many people are aware, is simply working together to achieve a common purpose. Explicit teaching is perhaps a less well-known term, and this simply means teaching that is focused on directing student attention to a very specific learning in a structured environment. So very much the opposite of implicit teaching, where students sort of learn it while simply doing the work. This is specifically teaching them something. Productiveness, as many people are aware, is how much has been achieved in a set amount of time. On the other hand, 21st century competencies, which collaboration is one of, are a number of different competencies that are considered to be of high importance for young people and really for all people in our modern world. So these consist of collaboration, but also such competencies as critical thinking, communication, and creativity. So all very important things in this 21st century. So after these terms were defined, this is when I started some of the background research for the study. So the first source I really looked at is one that I found very useful in providing this foundation for me. This was one by Sparks entitled, "Children Must Be Taught to Collaborate, Studies Say. Researchers Explore Group Work in Class." And this was published in Education Week. So this source began by really focusing on the fact that collaboration skills are essential in the 21st century, not only in an academic setting, so not only in schools, but also simply in life. So after school, in the workplace, it's essential, but also in their personal lives. Collaboration is something that will, no matter what, always benefit students and benefit everyone really. It then drew the conclusion that these skills must be taught, that this is what recent research has showed, that teaching these skills will really help students collaborate better. From here it broke down what these three main skills are that must be taught. So this was how to communicate with others, both in a polite and respectful way, how to resolve conflicts, and this is something that the research question very much focuses on, as well as how to manage tasks. So to make sure that all students are pulling their own weight, doing their fair share, but also doing work that focuses on their strengths as well. The next source that I looked at was by Hesse, Kerr, Buder, Sassenberg, and Griffin in the book Assessment and Teaching of 21st Century Skills. And this was a chapter entitled A Framework for Teachable Collaborative Problem-Solving Skills. So this article focused very much on the definitions around collaboration and a lot more of the theory behind it, which was still very useful to look at. So with this one, it very much had a different way of looking at collaboration. So contrary to the first article, it considered collaboration to consist of participation, so all students doing their part, perspective taking, so very much related to conflict resolution in that way, being able to understand where others are coming from, and finally social regulation, so making sure that friendships or lack thereof do not get in the way of working well together. The article then broke down these elements and into what they sort of consist of, and then they gave examples of what these would look implemented in the classroom. So participation not merely being all students do their part, but also that one student does not sort of take on all of the work and doesn't give the chance for the others to participate at all. From here, I looked at a final research source by H. Jansen and Wubbles, that was actually published in the Cambridge Journal of Education, and it was called Collaborative Learning Practices, Teacher and Student Perceived Obstacles to Effective Student Collaboration. So this was actually a study that took place in a few different teachers' colleges in Vietnam, and it looked at 19 teachers and 23 students. And so this was very, very interesting, and it actually, at the end of the study, it identified the four main obstacles that it found were preventing good collaboration. And this was, first of all, the lack of collaborative skills, which is addressed heavily in this presentation. Free riding, so students that believe that they don't need to do any work and simply letting others in their group do all the work. Competence status, so students believing that they should do all the work because they're better at it than others, or the other students should not be allowed to do the work because they simply won't do a good job. And finally, friendship. So students get distracted either because of close friendships with students or lack of friendships with them. So finally, what I found very interesting about this article was that it really focused on the fact that teachers should not only evaluate the finished product, but assess and encourage cooperation throughout the collaborative process. So when teachers focus on the product rather than the process as well, it actually encourages core collaboration. This is something interesting I had not really previously thought of that much. So from here, I went on to devise my actual action research plan. So to begin with, I looked at a few different data sources. These consisted of teacher journals, teacher observations, and interviews. So the journals would happen at the end of every week on the Friday and reflect on the group work and collaboration skills I noticed in the class. How are these changing or transforming? How are the students doing with this? These would often be based on the teacher observations. So these would be anecdotal notes taken using an observation guide with specific descriptors throughout the whole process. And finally, the last data source would focus on student input via interviews. So these would take place with 6 to 8 students from various backgrounds and levels of achievement, so there's a wide variety. These would take place at the beginning, middle, and end of the study, and probe into students' experiences working together and assess whether this has changed at all. Do they find it easier to work together? Are they employing some of these conflict resolution strategies? And other such questions as that. So a very important aspect of doing research is making sure that this research is valid and reliable. And to do that, triangulation is a very, very important component. As the picture shows, An important part of triangulation is making sure that research and data is gathered from as many different sources as possible, which is why these 3 specific ones were used. So observations would be taken throughout the process, and these would try to be as objective as possible, so try not to draw any conclusions. And these would be based on very specific factors and descriptors, such as participation, conflict resolution, attentive listening, and division of labor. The journals are where some initial conclusions will be drawn, and these will reflect on the observations, so have a very different role. And these will happen at very specific times throughout the study, just like with the interviews. This is so that I'm not merely reflecting on collaboration after one particularly good example of collaboration, so that the results are not skewed at all. The interviews themselves will be a chance to hear from the students more directly. So once again, a very different sort of data, and these will rely heavily on open-ended questions to really gather that student input, so that I'm not fishing for specific answers. In this case, I decided that a good setting for this would be in my previous placement class. So this was with grade 5-6 students. There are 29 students altogether. The anecdotal notes would actually be taken of all students throughout the class, where the interview would only take place with 6 to 8 chosen students from different backgrounds, and that would take place at the beginning, middle, and end of the study. Colleagues will be consulted throughout for advice, but not otherwise involved. So an important part of any study is the ethical considerations. Because this, all notes that are taken during the study will be kept in a locked drawer, and they'll actually be disposed of 6 months after sharing the results of the study. Of course, when the results are shared, no students' names will be used. They'll either use initials or pseudonyms instead, and before the study even begins, permission will be asked from the parents first, and if students do not wish to participate, they may withdraw from the study without any penalty whatsoever. And of course the principal will still be consulted as well, and interviews will only be recorded if consent is first given. So as was previously discussed, all of the study will take place between September and December. So the anecdotal notes will take place throughout every time that collaboration happens in the classroom. Teacher journals will take place at the end of every week, so on the Friday, and they'll reflect on the anecdotal notes. Whereas the interviews will take place at 3 different times. Once at the beginning of the study, so it's likely at the beginning of September, once in the middle of the study, so around the end of October or beginning of November, and once at the end of the study, so likely before the holidays start in December. So this will lead on to the analysis of the data, which is a very important part. So it relies on both qualitative and quantitative data. So the anecdotal notes provide the qualitative data. So this is such things, this will really rely heavily on the use of descriptors, so such as student is on task, student is doing their fair share of the work, and things like that, and it'll use a rating scale from 1 to 5 to assess how well the students are doing this. And it'll be compared at the beginning, middle, and end of the study to see if there's been any improvement. But there'll also be a midway checkpoint, so that if there is no improvement being made midway, to assess whether or not there should be change to the approach. This will all be organized onto a spreadsheet. Quantitative data will be taken from interviews and journals, and for this, it'll be very much that, because there will be a lot of writing and text there, that I'll have to skim through this text and highlight important themes using different colors. From here, I'll narrow down the themes to what I see as the top 3 or 5 most important and relevant themes. And then notes will be taken about how these themes have transformed and any differences or changes that I've noticed in them throughout. So this study is going to be very, very important, especially for myself as a teacher, because if I find that collaboration and group work really does improve if the skills are explicitly taught at the beginning of the year, then I know to do that from now on in my classes, and that this will help improve collaboration and group work among all my students. And of course, this is a very important thing for teachers, so this is something I'm personally very passionate about. So as was discussed earlier, I relied on 3 main sources when I was doing my research for this study. The first one was by Sparks, gave a good foundation. Next one by Hesse, Kerr, Hooter, Sassenberg, and Griffin that really relied on definitions and theory. And the final one was a study by H. Hansen and Wubbles that took place, and I also found very informative. Thank you very much for listening.